The idea of home protection was central to many women, especially religious women. Willard used religion a lot in her speeches, and the WCTU supporters liked that. But she also explained that women's suffrage was the best way of protecting women from men drinking alcohol and being violent. To return to the Goldilocks idea again, the idea of women having the right to vote was too hot for some people. The idea of home protection was too cold for others. But when women's leaders explained how women could make things better for everybody, things were neither too hot nor too cold, and soon women achieved the right to vote in a number of states. After 20 years of fighting, the two women's suffrage organizations wanted to work together again. But it was very difficult for Stone to work with Anthony. They had been fighting for years, and the relationship was broken. After 3 years, in 1890, Stone realized it was impossible. She asked her daughter and her daughter's husband to take on the job, and the two organizations did come together. When Lucy Stone was dying in 1893, she whispered to her daughter, "Make the world better." It took another 27 years before women's suffrage was achieved in the United States, in 1920, but Stone had done a lot of the early work toward it. Chapter 6. How to be a Rebel. A few seconds ago, he was standing calmly on third base. Now his feet are dancing. He is ready to run to home base. He has been here before. He is one of the greatest players ever to play baseball. 4 times he has led his team to the World Series, and all 4 times they have lost to the Yankees. Now his team is down 6-4 in the 8th inning. Is it time to try to steal home? Stealing a base is one of the riskiest moves in baseball. It increases your team's chances of scoring by only 3%. And to do it successfully, you have to slide into the base at high speed, and there is a good chance you will hurt yourself. Stealing home base is even riskier than stealing other bases, because the pitcher can see you, and he has an easy throw. The pitcher has to throw the ball 60 feet. You have to run 90 feet, so you have to run faster than the ball. And your chances of getting hurt when you are running to home base are 4 times higher. In the whole of the 2012 season, only 3 players tried to steal home. This man, though, is different. He has stolen home base more than any other player of the day, 19 times. In 100 years, only 2 other players have managed more than 9. But if you think stealing base is about speed, think again. He's 36 now, no longer a young man. He's been injured for part of the season. 6 years ago, he stole 37 bases in a season, but he has stolen far fewer in the last 2 seasons. His hair is silver, and he weighs more than he used to. This will be his last season. But this man has spent his life taking action when others stood and watched, and he's not going to stop now. He waits for the right time, and then runs. He slides into home base just in time. It's too little, too late. His team loses the first game to the Yankees, but the effect on the team is enormous. They are on fire for the rest of the season and go on to win. Years later, a journalist said that this man's attempts to steal home base were the second bravest thing he had ever done. The first was becoming Major League Baseball's first black player in 1947. To become original, we need to take some risks. We can never be sure that we will succeed. As journalist Robert Quillen wrote in 1924, progress always involves risk. You can't steal second and keep 1 foot on first base. From the start, Jackie Robinson had to deal with white players who refused to play with or against him, as well as hate mail. What made him so brave? We can begin to find the answer by looking at the families of players who are good at stealing bases. Since 1962, only 10 players have stolen at least 70 bases in 2 different seasons. Do you see anything interesting here? Look at the table on the next page. Trying to find out why some baseball players steal more bases than other players, Frank Sulloway and Richard Zreigenhaft found more than 400 men who played professional baseball. Then they found something surprising. Birth order can tell you which man will try to steal most bases. Younger brothers were 10.6 times more likely than older brothers to try to steal. Younger brothers weren't better players in other ways. The big difference was in how often they took risks. And they didn't just take more risks. They were 3.2 times more likely to steal a base safely. The desire to take risks actually means that younger brothers are less likely to play baseball. Across 24 studies of more than 8,000 people, younger brothers and sisters were 1.48 times more likely to choose sports where there are more injuries, such as football, rugby, diving, skiing, and car racing. Older brothers and sisters preferred safer sports: baseball, golf, tennis, rowing, and cycling. If we look at the 3 players who have stolen the most bases, Jackie Robinson was the youngest of 5 children. Rod Carew, who comes second in the number of steals, is 4th of 5 children. And third is Paul Molitor, who is the 4th child of 8. Younger children are not just risk-takers in baseball. There are differences in politics and science too. Sulloway researched nearly 4,000 scientists to see what they had said when revolutionary ideas appeared. He looked at the ideas of major scientists such as Copernicus, Darwin, Newton, and Einstein, and he researched what 4,000 other scientists had written at the time. Had they supported these revolutionary ideas or not? Compared to first-born children, scientists who were younger children were 3 times more likely to support Newton and Einstein at the time when their theories were revolutionary. In the 50 years after Copernicus published his idea that the Earth went around the Sun, scientists who were younger children were 5.4 times more likely to support Copernicus' ideas than first-born scientists. We often expect that younger scientists are more likely to support new ideas. But Sulloway shows that birth order is actually more important than age. As a firstborn myself, I was a little upset by this research. But as I learned more, I realized that the effects of birth order can be avoided. By bringing up all children in a similar way to younger children, we can raise any child to be more original. This chapter looks at how the family affects originality. What is special about being a younger child? Does family size matter? And how can this affect the way we raise our children? I'll use birth order as a way of looking at the effect family has on how likely we are to take risks. To see how brothers and sisters are more different than we expect, we'll look at how Jackie Robinson was raised, and also at the early years of some of the greatest comedy stars in America. You'll also find out how parents congratulate children in the wrong way, and how reading stories can help originality. Born to be a rebel. One day in 1944, when he was still in the army, Jackie Robinson refused to sit at the back of a bus with other African Americans. The driver shouted that if I didn't move to the back of the bus, he would cause me plenty of trouble, Robinson remembered. Robinson told the driver he couldn't care less about the driver causing him trouble. When Robinson talked about his attempt to steal home base in the World Series, he used similar language. I just took off and did it. I really didn't care whether I made it or not. I really didn't care tells us something important about Jackie Robinson and what he had learned about risk. Many people, when they are deciding what to do, think about how to get the best results. But someone like Robinson thinks differently. What is the right thing for someone like me to do? These people don't look at other people. They decide by looking at themselves. The first group of people, who think about the results and what other people will think, can always find a reason not to take a risk. And this sort of decision can be decided by birth order. For many years, experts have argued that it is helpful to be firstborn. When he or she is born, the first child doesn't have to share parents with brothers or sisters and gets a lot more of their parents' time. Firstborns are more likely to win a Nobel Prize for science or to get into the United States Congress. Research into 1,500 CEOs shows that 43% of them were firstborn. In Europe, it was shown that firstborns earn salaries that are 14% higher than their younger brothers and sisters when they start work. But the situation changes by the time they reach the age of 30. The salaries of those born later grow faster because they are willing to change jobs sooner and more often. Firstborns avoid risk more than those born after them. Those born later are more likely to drink or smoke, and they are less likely to have good insurance. Although many people now think that birth order has some effect, the science of birth order has many critics. Birth order doesn't fix you in any way, it only affects the direction in which you will probably develop. There are a lot of other things that can affect you. It's difficult for research to look at birth order on its own. There are too many other things that can affect development. But when I looked at birth order, I discovered that it was a better way of deciding whether a person would be a risk-taker than I had expected. In one study, people scored their brothers and sisters and themselves on school achievement and on whether they were rebels or not. A rebel is someone who doesn't accept the default. People with high school achievement were 2.3 times more likely to be born first than last. Rebels were twice as likely to be born last than first. There are two possible ways to explain the risk-taking in those born later. One is about how children deal with arguments with their brothers and sisters. The other is about how parents raise younger children differently. Although we can't control birth order, we can change some of its effects. Niche picking. Look at a lot of brothers and sisters, and you will see the big differences in personality aren't between families, but between children in families. As adults, brothers and sisters from the same family are different in how much risk they want to take, or how much they rebel, even though they have been raised by the same parents. Niche picking may help to explain this. The idea was developed by Alfred Adler, who thought that Sigmund Freud's theories about parents didn't explain the part that brothers and sisters play in the development of one another's personality. Adler suggested that because firstborn children start life as only children, they learn from their parents. When second or third children come along, the first child risks losing its first place, so may decide to take on the job of being a parent and give orders to the younger child. The younger child answers this by becoming a rebel. It can be difficult to compete with an older brother or sister, so the younger child has to choose a different path. The niche of the responsible academic achiever is often taken by the first child. Once the first child has taken this niche, it can be difficult for the next to compete. This depends on the age difference. If it's only 1 year, the younger child may be able to compete. And if it's 7 years, the niche may be open again. In baseball, brothers who are between 2 and 5 years apart were more likely to play in different positions than brothers who were less than 2 or more than 5 years apart. Jackie Robinson was a runner at college, but he couldn't compete with his older brother Mac, who was 5 years older and won a silver medal at the 1936 Olympic Games. Jackie Robinson changed to basketball, football, and then baseball. Outside of the world of sports, I decided to look at comedy. Comedy seems like a risky job, so we would expect younger children to be more successful. I looked at a 2004 list of the 100 greatest comedy performers. You would expect an equal number of any group of 100 to be born first or born last. However, when I looked at these 100 people, 44 of them were born last, while only 20 were born first. They came from families with an average of 3.5 children, but nearly half were the baby of their families. When I looked at particular performers, I found that their older brothers and sisters were often responsible achievers. For example, Chelsea Handler's 5 older brothers and sisters are an engineer, a chef, an accountant, a lawyer, and a nurse. Niche picking shows how younger children often try to be different from their older brothers and sisters. Parents may try to give each child the same experience, but birth order pushes their personalities in different directions. Less responsibility. If Jackie Robinson had been a first child, he would have been raised mainly by his mother. But with 5 children to feed, Mrs. Robinson needed to work. Robinson's older sister, Willa May, washed him, dressed him, and fed him. And when she went to school, she took her baby brother with her, and he played outside of the classroom. And if he got into fights, his older brother Frank was there to defend him. When older brothers and sisters behave like parents, there aren't as many rules or punishments, and younger children take risks earlier. Parents often become more relaxed with the younger children, and things are not so strict. And as the older children take on more responsibilities, there is less need for the younger child to be responsible. The larger the family, the more the younger children can escape responsibility. We can explain the risk-taking of many originals by their position in the family, and the fact that this gives them more freedom and allows them to be rebels. But parents can encourage children to be original, whether they are the first or the last. But one of the dangers of originality is that being a rebel is not always positive. It can also be negative. Some research into how parents deal with good or bad behavior will be helpful here. Explaining and correcting. Some years ago, researchers found that between the ages of 2 and 10, parents ask their children to change their behavior once every 6 to 9 minutes. This means perhaps 50 times a day, or more than 15,000 times a year. For their altruistic personality study, Samuel and Pearl Oliner studied people who had taken great risks to save Jews during the Holocaust between 1940 and 1945, when 6 million Jews were murdered. They discovered there was a difference in how parents had corrected the mistakes of those risk-takers when they were children. Their parents explained why they were correcting them 21% of the time, compared to 6% of the time for other parents. One interviewee said that her mother told me when I did something wrong. She tried to make me understand with my mind what I'd done wrong. The Oliners also found that explaining was especially useful when it made children think what would happen to other people as a result of their actions. This can also work with adults. In hospitals, to encourage doctors and nurses to wash their hands more often, David Hoffman and I put 2 different signs next to soap machines. Washing your hands stops you catching illnesses. Washing your hands stops patients catching illnesses. Over the next 2 weeks, we counted the number of times doctors and nurses washed their hands before and after seeing a patient. The sign on the left made no difference, but the sign on the right made a big difference. Using the word patients instead of you resulted in 10% more hand washing and 45% more soap being used. Thinking about other people changed doctors' and nurses' behavior more than thinking about themselves. Behavior and character. Good behavior is encouraged partly by what parents say after a child has done the right thing. The last time you saw a child doing something good, you probably talked about what they had done. That was so sweet. By talking about their behavior, you encourage them to do it again. But Joan Grusek did an interesting experiment about this. After some children shared toys with other children, some of them had their behavior mentioned in feedback. It was nice of you to share those toys with other children. That was a nice and helpful thing to do. Others were given feedback on their characters. I guess you are the kind of person who likes to help others. You are a helpful person. Later, in a similar situation, the children who had received character comments were 45% more likely to share toys, while those who received behavior comments were only 10% more likely to share. When our character is mentioned, we begin to build up an idea of ourselves as a good person. It has been suggested that the message, "Don't drink and drive," might be better if it were changed to "Don't be a drunk driver." The same idea can be used for originality. When a child produces a good painting, rather than saying that their work is creative, we could say, "You are creative." When we move from talking about behavior to talking about character, people think differently. Why parents aren't the best role models. We can give children quite a lot of freedom if we explain how what they do affects other people. They will be more likely to be original in a positive way rather than a negative one. But as they grow up, they often don't aim high enough. Parents can begin the development of originality in their children, but as children get older, they need role models, people who have been original in their own area of work. Jackie Robinson, for example, found a role model in a young mechanic. As a boy, there was a danger that Robinson would become a member of a criminal gang, but this mechanic explained to Robinson that he was hurting his mother. Martin Luther King Jr. had Gandhi as a role model, as did Nelson Mandela. Some originals have found role models in fiction. For example, Sheryl Sandberg and Jeff Bezos have both mentioned finding a role model in the book A Wrinkle in Time, in which a young girl learns to bend the laws of physics and travel through time. There are studies that show that when children's stories show original achievements, people innovate more 20 to 40 years later. In one study, psychologists noted that original achievement increased in American children's books by 66% between 1810 and 1850. Between 1850 and 1890, the number of patents increased by 700%. Children's books reflected popular values at the time, but also helped to create values. It takes time for children to learn originality from characters in fiction. We can be sure that the next group of originals will have been affected by Harry Potter, books where there is a lot of original achievement. When children read about heroes who are also originals, it may change the way they pick their niches in the family. Wherever we are in family birth order, there are niches for us, and role models for originality. Chapter 7. Groupthink. Standing on stage in front of his audience, a technology inventor pulled something out of his pocket. It was so much smaller than competing products that nobody in the room could believe it. He was a man known for his originality and creativity, and he didn't believe in market research. He said his company makes products that people do not even know they want. This man made his company great, only to be forced out and then watch his company disappear. The story seems to describe Steve Jobs, but actually this man was one of Jobs' heroes, Edwin Land, the man behind Polaroid. Today, Land is remembered for inventing the instant camera. But Land also invented something much more important: the light filter that is used in billions of products, from sunglasses to watches. Land was responsible for 535 patents, more than any American before him except for Thomas Edison. Land was certainly a great original, but his company did not encourage originality. Polaroid was one of the companies that started work on the digital camera, but, in the end, the company failed because of it. Polaroid's engineers had a high-quality digital camera ready in 1992, but the inventors couldn't persuade the company to start selling it until 1996. By then, there were more than 40 other digital cameras on the market. Polaroid made a basic mistake. Within the company, many people thought that customers would always want to have printed pictures, and the important people in the organization didn't question this idea. It was a case of groupthink. the desire to reach agreement instead of allowing disagreement. Groupthink is the enemy of originality. In a famous study, the psychologist Irving Yannis argued that many bad decisions made by the United States government were caused by groupthink. Yannis believed that groupthink occurred when people felt they were deeply involved in a group and they wanted to agree with a group, instead of suggesting different ideas. He said that it was the safe, friendly feelings inside a close group that created groupthink. People accepted Yannis' theory for a long time, but it isn't true. Yannis did his work in 1973, but researchers now have seen a lot more government documents, and it's clear that these bad decisions were not made by one small, close group. And there was another problem with Yannis' theory. Most of the time, he looked at groups making bad decisions. But how do we know that it was actually the closeness of the group that caused the bad decisions? Yannis needed to compare good and bad decisions to see whether close groups are more likely to make decisions through groupthink. The theory of close groups causing groupthink isn't true in business either. When researchers looked at successful and failed decisions in management teams at 7 major companies, they discovered that close groups weren't more likely to want to agree with each other and refuse different ideas. In fact, close groups often made better business decisions. The same was true in politics. In this chapter, I want to look at what really causes groupthink and what we can do to prevent it. Why do some close groups make bad decisions while others make good ones? I want to see how to fight groupthink and allow original opinions. I'll look at Polaroid's mistakes, and I'll also examine an organisation that has an interesting new way of avoiding conformity. You'll see why people often don't listen to original ideas, and why it's sometimes better to ask people to complain about problems rather than to solve them. In the end, you'll see what ordinary people and organisations can do to allow originality to develop. Commitment to organisations. In the 1990s, a group of experts led by James Barron interviewed 200 people who had started technology companies in Silicon Valley. They asked these leaders what sort of organisation they were trying to develop when they started out. They found 3 major organisational plans: professional, star, and commitment. In a professional organisation, managers tried to hire people with the right skills, engineers who could write in JavaScript or C++, for example. In a star organisation, managers were not so interested in skills as in the future. They looked for the brightest people and didn't worry so much about their skills because these people would learn quickly. In a commitment organisation, employees were hired to fit company culture. Skills and intelligence were useful, but the important thing was that the employee believed in the company. Commitment organisations wanted to build strong emotional links between employees and to the organisation. They often used words like family and love when they talked about the company. Barron's team wanted to see which type of organisation led to the most success. They followed the 200 companies through the 1990s into the 2000s. They discovered that one organisational culture was much better than the others: commitment. Where a company had a commitment culture, the number of failures was 0. Not one of them went out of business. But the number of failures for star organizations was high, and professional companies did even worse. We can see that a commitment culture worked well in the early days of Polaroid, when everybody worked hard and there was a desire for originality and quality. When Edwin Land was developing his instant camera, he once worked for 18 days without stopping, not even changing his clothes. While his competitor, Kodak, hired scientists, Land looked for a mixed group of employees, including women with artistic experience. Just like the commitment organizations in Silicon Valley, he didn't worry about skills or star qualities. He wanted people who would have original ideas and work hard for the company. His employees developed strong emotional links with the company. When you feel like that, it's hard to imagine working somewhere else. After the instant camera, Polaroid was responsible for two other important new developments in film technology. The first was the use of sepia, or brown photos. Black and white instant photos often faded, and sepia worked better. The person who discovered that was Mary Morse, who had been a student of art history and had not studied either physics or chemistry in college. She worked so hard that her laboratory worked 24 hours a day. The second new product was instant colour photography. Howard Rogers, who had been a car mechanic, worked for 15 years to solve that problem. Problems with growth. Commitment cultures are very useful at the beginning of the life of an organization. But, over time, things don't usually go so well. Although these companies grow well at first, growth slows down after a time. When employees share a commitment to the company's clear goals, they can work well in a business situation that they understand. But if things keep changing, as they do in the computer or airline industries, the positive things about this strong culture disappear. When the market is changing, these companies find it difficult to look outside of themselves, and they fail to learn and change. This is what happened with Polaroid. After Land invented the instant camera in 1948, the company went from making under $7 million in 1950 to making $950 million in 1976. During this time, there were no big changes in the industry. Customers loved high-quality cameras that printed instant pictures. But with the development of digital technology, the market began to change, and Polaroid's culture didn't allow the company to move as fast as market developments. In 1980, Land was contacted by Akio Morita of Sony, who suggested that film was not the future, and wanted Sony and Polaroid to work together on an electronic camera. Land wasn't interested. He thought only about the chemistry and physics in photography, and didn't believe digital photos would ever be good enough. As Polaroid began to have difficulties, Land didn't look outside of his organization. Instead, he worked only with his supporters inside the company. He wanted to make an instant movie camera, and he wouldn't listen to any critics. When it was ready, it wasn't a success. It made only a few minutes of video, while competitors already had cameras that could make several hours. The company lost $600 million, and Land lost his job. Land was not alone in the way he behaved. Research shows that the worse a company does, the more the bosses get advice only from the people who agree with them, but this is the opposite of what they should do. Different opinions are useful, even when they are wrong. The evidence suggests that it isn't social links that create groupthink, but too much confidence. Polaroid had too much confidence that customers would always want printed pictures, and they refused to look at other original ideas. So how can you build a strong culture that welcomes disagreement? Think differently. When I asked entrepreneurs and students about the strongest culture they had ever met in an organization, the winner was Bridgewater Associates. This company in Connecticut manages over $170 billion for governments, universities, and other organizations. The company culture is explained in a book of 200 key ideas. Although the company manages money, none of these ideas are about money. They are about how to behave in any situation that you meet, at work or outside. New employees are hired only if they fit in with the company's ideas, and there is a camp where they study and discuss them. Although there is a lot of discussion, Bridgewater is a close, friendly organization. Many employees call it a family, and people often work there for a long time. Although Bridgewater has a strong commitment culture in an industry that changes all the time, it has continued to be successful for 20 years. Its secret is that it encourages original ideas. If you are an investor, you can only succeed if you think differently from everyone else. Bridgewater avoids groupthink by inviting different opinions from everyone in the company. When employees share independent ideas instead of agreeing with everyone else, there is a much better chance that Bridgewater will make decisions no one else has thought of. And then there is a better chance they will be right, when the rest of the market is wrong. I want to look now at the culture of the company, which lies behind its brilliant decisions. Bridgewater's success begins with the man who started the company, Ray Dalio. He's been called the Steve Jobs of investing, but employees don't behave as though he is special. They are expected to be critical of him, and employee comments are shared across the company. One of the 200 key ideas is, no one has the right to hold a critical opinion without speaking up about it. Dalio wants people who think independently and believes that this will make the culture richer and stronger and better able to avoid groupthink. Finding complainers. If you're a leader talking to your employees, how would you complete this sentence? Don't bring me blank. Bring me blank. I learned about this question from David Hoffman, and I've presented it to thousands of groups of leaders. They always shout out the same answer. Don't bring me problems, bring me answers. This seems wise. We don't want people just to complain. When they see something wrong, they should find a way to fix it. But when it comes to groupthink, this isn't always a good thing. Hoffman has done a lot of research in this area, and he found that a culture that looks mainly at solving problems doesn't encourage people to investigate. If you are expected to always have an answer, you come to meetings ready with your answers, and you don't get the chance to learn from others. To try to avoid this problem, Google has created a team of complainers, engineers across the company who are well known for recognizing problems and saying what they really think, even if it is negative. Before a major change, managers often ask this team to give critical feedback. By talking to the complainers early, the managers get the feedback, and the complainers often then become the key people to support the change. Ray Dalio at Bridgewater doesn't expect employees to bring him answers. One of the first things he did in the company was to create a list of problems, which any employee could add to. Getting problems noted is half the battle against groupthink. The other half is listening to the right ideas for solving them. Bridgewater collects a group of people to look at the problems, share their ideas, find out what has gone wrong and why, and suggest ways of solving the problems. It is important that ideas are shared. As Carl Weick advises, argue like you're right and listen like you're wrong. Critical feedback. Even if an organization doesn't encourage critical feedback from its employees, there may be ways of changing the culture. At Index Group, the company's CEO, Tom Geraghty, brought in an expert to tell him everything he did wrong in front of his 100 employees. By showing he was happy to get feedback, he found that employees from across the company were more likely to challenge his ideas and to challenge one another. I've learnt to do something similar in my classroom. I collect feedback from students after the first month, asking for suggestions for improvement. I then email all the feedback to the class. In the next class, I discuss the suggestions, ask for more feedback, and suggest changes. Students often say that this helps them to feel comfortable about becoming more involved in improving the class. It isn't just the open culture at Bridgewater that makes it easier for employees to challenge managers. When they are new in the company, employees are encouraged to question the company's key ideas. In most companies, the employee is busy learning the job for the first few months and isn't encouraged to think about any problems. But in fact, those early days, when employees have more time and before they see the world in the company way, are a good time for them to think about improving the culture. A few years ago, I was hired by Goldman Sachs to help them attract and keep excellent employees by encouraging those employees to improve their place of work. One thing we introduced was an entry interview. Managers have meetings to ask new employees for ideas when they start, instead of waiting to ask employees what they thought of the company when they leave. It's easier to start a relationship with the door open than to try to push open a door that has already been closed. Movers and shapers. Ray Dalio at Bridgewater is interested in understanding people who shape the world and in finding out how they are similar. He's interviewed many originals of our time and has studied originals from history like Benjamin Franklin and Albert Einstein. Of course, all of these people were enthusiastic and had great imagination, but Dalio has 3 other qualities on his list of similarities. First, shapers are independent thinkers and rebels who ask a lot of questions. Second, they are honest critics and don't care who they are talking to. And third, they are not afraid of risk. Their fear of not succeeding is greater than their fear of failure. If Dalio doesn't find a shaper to follow him, Bridgewater may go the same way as Polaroid. But Dalio knows that preventing groupthink is about more than the ideas of one leader. The greatest shapers don't stop at introducing originality into the world. They create cultures that encourage originality in others. Chapter 8. Working with Emotions. In 2007, a man called Lewis Pugh jumped into the Arctic Sea. The ice was not completely frozen, and Pugh's plan was to be the first person to survive a long-distance swim across the North Pole. Pugh had been in the British Special Air Service before becoming the best cold-water swimmer on the planet. 2 years earlier, he had jumped off of the ice to swim a kilometre in Antarctica. But he doesn't do it just to be the best in the world. He wants to make people think about climate change. Before he swims, something happens to Pugh that has never been noticed in any other human. His body temperature goes up from 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit to 101 degrees Fahrenheit. When it is time to get into the freezing water, his body prepares. The passengers on the Titanic died in water that was 41 degrees Fahrenheit. In Pugh's Antarctic swim, the water had been 32 degrees Fahrenheit. At the North Pole, it was less than 29 degrees Fahrenheit. After falling into that water, a British explorer had lost fingers in 3 minutes. Pugh's team estimated that his swim would take 20 minutes. But a 5-minute test swim at the North Pole went badly, and instead of imagining success, Pugh began to imagine failure. If he failed, he would die. He became very afraid and questioned whether he would survive. So, would it have been better for him to imagine success? This chapter looks at the emotional cost of going against the crowd. In my own research in a healthcare company, I tested how much employees knew about how to manage emotions. Those who showed up well in the emotion test also spoke up more with ideas and suggestions in the workplace, and their managers thought they were better employees. They had the courage to challenge, but they were also able to control their emotions when they were doing it. To understand these emotional skills, I'll look at how Pugh got ready for the freezing water, and how Martin Luther King Jr. prepared civil rights workers to keep calm. I'll explore how one group managed to throw out a dictator, and how a leader in technology persuaded engineers to make a major change to their product. By studying how to manage emotions, you'll discover whether it's better to plan for success or failure, whether calming yourself down can fight fear, how to deal with your anger, and what it takes to keep going when everything seems to be against you. Optimism and Pessimism. Although many originals seem to be confident on the outside, inside they often worry and doubt their own abilities. When United States government leaders described their most difficult decisions, they didn't talk about difficult problems, but about choices that needed courage. And research by Scott Sonnenschein has shown that people working for a better environment are often uncertain about whether they can succeed. Challenging the present situation is often hard work, and there will be problems and failures along the way. Psychologist Julie Norham studies 2 different ways of managing these challenges: optimism and pessimism. Optimists expect that the best will happen. They stay calm and expect to succeed. Pessimists expect the worst. They worry, and they imagine all the things that can go wrong. Most people think it's better to be an optimist than a pessimist. Yet Norham found that although pessimists worry more and are less confident, they do their jobs as well as the optimists. And Norham soon realized that pessimists did well because of their pessimism. Norham explains that pessimism works as a way of managing fear and worry. When pessimists start to doubt themselves, they don't allow themselves to freeze with fear. They imagine an enormous failure to make them worry more, and that gives them reasons to succeed. Once they have imagined everything that can go wrong, they look at how to avoid those problems, and this makes them feel they can control things. They worry most before they act, so when they start to move, they are ready to succeed. They are confident because they know they have prepared as well as possible. If they don't worry, then they relax and don't plan. It's important that pessimists don't feel comfortable. Lewis Pugh was usually an optimist. He took risks when other people would give up. But in the weeks before a major swim, he was often more of a pessimist. It was not the words of his own team that encouraged him, but the words of people who doubted him. 2 years earlier, before another freezing swim, an expert had told him that it was impossible and that he would die. As Pugh stood shaking at the North Pole, his pessimism told him that things were not going to go well. But instead of trying to find reasons to be happier, he started to think about every possible risk. He made plans to be sure that he spent very little time on the ice before the swim and to get to the boat as quickly as possible afterward. The trick is to make fear your friend, he says on his website, www.lewispugh.com. But this isn't enough. Pessimism can be helpful when you're sure about what you want to do, but when you're not so sure, doubt can get in the way. Keep believing. When most people list the things that frighten them, one thing comes up very often: speaking in public. If we want to understand how people manage fear, we can just put them on stage. Alison Wood Brooks asked college students to give a speech about why they would be good to work with. The speeches were filmed, and a group of students was ready to watch them and score them. With only 2 minutes to prepare, many of the students were actually shaking. If you were in this situation, how would you manage your fear? When 300 professional workers were asked, 90% suggested, try to relax and calm down. But this is not the best advice. Before the college students gave their speeches, Brooks asked them to say 3 words out loud. Half of them were asked to say, I am calm. The other half were asked to say, I am excited. Changing one word was enough to change the quality of the speeches. When students attached the label excited to their emotions, they were scored as 17% better at persuading and 15% more confident than those students who said they were calm. The excited students also gave longer speeches than the calm students. In another experiment, when students were nervous before a math test, they scored 22% better if they were told, try to get excited, instead of try to remain calm. Brooks wanted to find out if it's better just to accept worry, so she gave students another frightening task. They were asked to sing in public, and they would be scored on the quality of their singing. This time, One group wasn't asked to say anything before singing, another was asked to say, "I am worried," and a third, "I am excited." The group who said nothing scored 69%. The group who said worried scored only 53%. But the group who said excited scored 80%. When we are frightened, why is it better to make ourselves excited than to try to stay calm? Fear is a strong emotion. When we are frightened, our heart gets faster. If we then try to relax, it's like trying to stop a car suddenly when it's going fast. It's better to take a strong emotion and turn it into something different but equally strong. Author Susan Cain says that we have a stop system and a go system. When we haven't decided what we are going to do, pessimism is dangerous. Thinking too much about the dangers makes us worry and stop. Being optimistic makes us more likely to do something, to go. However, in a situation where we have already decided what we are going to do and start to worry about it, it is better to be a pessimist and turn our worries into positive emotions like excitement. This switches on our go system. In previous cold water swims, Lewis Pugh was certain he would succeed, so being a pessimist was helpful. Looking at all the possible dangers made him ready for anything. At the North Pole, this worked at first, but after the 5-minute test swim, which went badly, he started to worry. What I felt on that stupid test swim wasn't like anything I'd felt before. I don't believe I can do this. It was time to move away from pessimism. A friend gave him 3 ideas to get excited. First, he reminded Pugh that 29 people from 10 countries had helped him, and he put flags from those countries along the water. Second, the friend told him to think of his parents and how they had helped him. And third, he told him to think about climate change and how the swim might help. After listening to his friend, Pugh was ready to do the swim. He jumped into the freezing water and finished, successfully, in 18 minutes and 50 seconds. For Pugh, the most difficult thing was managing his own emotions. But other originals have to manage other people's emotions. When others are afraid to act, how can we encourage them? In 2009, 15 young tourists visited Belgrade, the capital of Serbia. After walking them around part of the city, their guide, a Serbian in his 30s, talked about the country's recent history of high potato prices and free concerts. But they weren't ordinary tourists, and they were getting impatient. They had come to Belgrade to learn how to get rid of their own country's dictator. They asked the guide how the people of Serbia had removed the Serbian dictator, Slobodan Milosevic. "You don't need to take big risks," the guide told them. "You can do lots of little things. Drive more slowly than usual. Push televisions through the streets, or turn lights on and off." The tourists just laughed. "Small things like that would never work for us," they said. "If we did that, we would be arrested and then disappear. How can we have a revolution when we can't meet in groups of more than 3? They didn't know it, but the guide had heard all this before. From Georgians in 2003, from Ukrainians in 2004, from Lebanese in 2005, and from Maldivians in 2008. In each case, they had gone back to their countries and removed a dictator. The guide, Sergej Popovich, had taught them all. He was one of the people behind Otpor, the non-violent organization of young people who had helped remove Milosevic. Popovich had been attacked by the dictator's police and had spent time in jail. When psychologist Dan McAdams and his team asked adults to tell them their life stories and how they felt at different times, they saw two patterns. Some people had mostly good experiences and were fairly happy during most of their lives. But people who had found original ways of helping others often had stories that started badly when they were young, but got better later. Although they had more bad experiences than the other group, these originals had more happiness. They managed their problems, and, in the end, their lives were happier and fuller. After leading the group that removed their dictator, Popovich began to help other groups that were trying to remove dictators without violence. Not every group succeeded, but we can learn a lot from Popovich's way of managing emotions. Using users to excite teams. When Josh Silverman took over at Skype in February 2008, the company had problems. Skype, a leader in free computer-to-computer calls, was no longer growing as fast as before. Silverman decided he had to do something big. In April, he announced that Skype 4.0 would appear before the end of the year, and it would include full-screen video. Most employees were deeply negative about this. They thought there wasn't enough time, the video quality would be poor, and users would hate using a full screen. Silverman didn't try to calm them down, but decided he needed to get them excited about video. He talked to employees about the big idea. It's not about making cheap phone calls, it's about being together when you're not in the same room. Silverman talked about how Skype allowed his children to keep close contact with their grandparents, who were thousands of miles away. Then he let other Skype users talk about what Skype had done for them. A married couple talked about how Skype kept them together when they had to spend a year living apart. A man in the army talked about how he could be with his children even when he was in another country. They even opened Christmas presents together. As they began to understand that Skype was about connecting people, the team's worries turned to excitement. Their Go system was switched on. Skype 4.0 was ready, on time, with high-quality full-screen video calls. Soon, Skype was adding 380,000 new users every day. Less than 3 years later, Microsoft bought Skype for $8.5 billion. The company had increased in value by 300%. In Serbia, Popovich knew he had to show people something to encourage them to act. People were too afraid to listen, so Popovich used a picture of a fist to encourage people's Go system. Strength in numbers. If you are the only person with an idea, it can be hard to defend it. But people can get strength from just a small number of people who think like them. To feel that you're not alone, you don't need a whole crowd. Research by Sigal Barsadeh and Hakan Oscilic has shown that in business or government, even having one friend may be enough. If you want people to take risks, you have to show them they aren't alone. This was the first part of Otpor's success. In 1998, they painted a fist on buildings all around Belgrade, together with sentences like, "I am against the government because I love Serbia," "Bite the system," and argue until we win. Before they saw the fist, people who were against Milosevic were afraid to say what they thought. But when they saw it, they realized there were others who were happy to take a risk. Later, when police arrested members of Otpor, those members were often asked who was their leader. Popovich and his friends taught them to answer, "I am one of the 20,000 leaders of Otpor." Around the world, different organizations have used small actions to show they are part of a larger group. In Chile, to complain about the dictator Pinochet, people turned their lights on and off. When people saw their neighbors doing that, they weren't afraid to do the same. Then people were invited to drive slowly. Taxi drivers slowed down, and so did bus drivers. Soon, people were walking slowly in the streets. People understood there was no risk. It's not against the law to drive or walk slowly. In Poland, when people were unhappy about government news on televisions, they knew that just turning off the television wasn't enough. So they took their televisions outside and pushed them through the streets. It's not against the law to push your television through the streets. In Serbia, Otpor found a clever way to change people's fear to excitement. Comedy. They sent birthday presents to Milosevic, a ticket out of the country, and a prison uniform. It's hard to be afraid of speaking up against a dictator when you are laughing at him. Laughter can work in other situations where people are afraid too. When you have no power, laughter is a powerful way to change strong negative emotions into positive ones. After hearing Popovich's story, a group of students wanted to do something about the very high cost of lessons at their university. They decided to show the university president pictures of their cheap and simple meals and invite themselves to dinner at his house. But Popovich also has a message that isn't funny at all. At first, Popovich seems to be an optimist. When others were ready to give up, he thought there was a better future for Serbia. But when I asked him if he was ever unsure, he told me he had doubts for all of those 10 years. Even today, he worries about the people who died, and he feels responsible. The importance of now. On New Year's Eve in 2000, Popovich and his friends organised a celebration in the main square in Belgrade, with music and dancing. At midnight, the famous band, the Red Hot Chili Peppers, would appear, and everyone was very excited. 1 minute before midnight, the square went dark, and people began counting down. But when it was midnight, no famous band appeared. Instead, a voice said, "We have nothing to celebrate. This has been a year of war. But it doesn't have to be that way. Let's make the coming year count. Because 2000 is the year." When John Cotter studied 100 companies that were trying to make major changes, he discovered that the first mistake they made was to fail to make people understand that acting quickly was important. Cotter noted that managers didn't realize how difficult it was to persuade people that change needed to happen, and it needed to happen now. If they don't understand the importance of speed, employees sit back and refuse to change. Otpor made people in Serbia understand the importance of speed when they announced this is the year. To understand this more, let's look at another piece of research by Amos Tversky and Daniel Kahneman. Imagine you are the manager of a car company. Sales are down, and you need to close 3 factories and lose 6,000 employees. You can choose between 2 different plans. Plan A will save one of the 3 factories and 2,000 jobs. Plan B has a 1/3 chance of saving all 3 factories and 6,000 jobs, but a 2/3 chance of saving no factories and no jobs. Most people, 80%, prefer Plan A. But let's now look at the choice in a different way. Plan A will lose 2 factories and 4,000 jobs. Plan B has a 2/3 chance of losing all 3 factories and 6,000 jobs, but a 1/3 chance of losing no factories or jobs. These are the same choices as the first time, but they don't feel like it. In this case, 82% of people prefer Plan B. In the first case, the choices show what we could gain. We prefer Plan A because it looks less risky. When we are sure we will gain something, we want to keep and protect it. We want to save 2,000 jobs rather than take a risk and save no jobs. In the second case, we are told what we are going to lose. Now we want to avoid losing anything, even if it means taking a bigger risk. We're going to lose thousands of jobs anyway, so we decide to take a big risk and hope that we lose nothing. If we want people to change, is it better to show them why it is helpful to change, or the costs of not changing? According to Peter Salovey, it depends on whether people think the change is safe or risky. If they think it is safe, it is better to talk about the good things that will happen if they do it. They will want to act immediately and get there quickly. But if they think it's risky, that doesn't work. They are comfortable where they are, so they don't see why they should change. If we want them to change, we have to talk about the bad things that will happen if they don't change. It's easier for people to take a risk when they know they will definitely lose something if they don't. At Merck, the medicine company, they wanted managers to be more involved in making changes. Managers were asked to think of ideas that would put Merck out of business. They imagined that they were one of Merck's competitors and developed ideas for new medicines that were better than Merck's, or looked at markets Merck had missed. Then they had to find ways to defend the company against these competitors. This kill the company exercise is strong because it asks people to think about what they might lose. Before, when managers thought about new products, they didn't want to take risks. But when they thought about their competitors, they realized it was a risk not to innovate. Popovich realized that strong emotions were needed to change the situation in Serbia. By stopping the concert and sending people home on New Year's Eve, he was reminding them to act now. Deep and surface acting. Anger is a good way to get people to do something. We feel we have to fight when someone has done the wrong thing. But although anger can encourage people to speak and to act, it can also make them do it the wrong way. Deborah Meyerson and Maureen Scully suggest that the key is to be hot-headed and cool-headed at the same time. The heat pushes us toward action and change. The coolness gives the action a useful shape. Arlie Hochschild has suggested that if you are feeling a strong emotion like worry or anger, there are 2 ways to manage it: surface acting and deep acting. Surface acting means changing your face, speech and actions to show you are calm. If you are working for an airline and an angry passenger starts to shout at you on a plane, you may smile and try to show some warmth. You change on the outside, but inside you haven't changed. You are angry with the passenger, and the passenger probably knows it. But if you are deep acting, you might imagine that the passenger is under stress, is afraid of flying, or has problems at home. You feel sorry for the passenger, and your smile is warmer. Before Lewis Pugh starts out on one of his swims, he uses deep acting. He listens to music and remembers jumping from a plane in his army days. He is returning to the excitement that he felt then, and which he wants to find again. Deep acting is a better way of managing emotions than surface acting. If we want to show our emotions, we have to feel them. The dangers of venting. Less than a year after Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat on a bus in Montgomery, a United States court decided that separating black and white people was against the law. Now that black people could sit anywhere on a bus, Martin Luther King Jr. and others realized they needed to help black people reply to the violence that they might meet. The team put chairs in rows, like a bus, and asked audience members to play black or white passengers. The white passengers called the black passengers names, pushed them, and threw things at them. The black passengers needed to act deeply. King wanted them to be angry enough to speak out, but not to be so angry that they became violent. What would be the best way to manage their anger? Many people suggest that venting works best, turning the anger against something else, like hitting a pillow or screaming. But studies have shown that venting doesn't help, even if you think it does or it makes you feel good. After venting, most people are even angrier than before. When King and his team worked on anger, they were careful to stop people venting. Sometimes a person playing a black man would get so angry that he hit back. They would work with him so that what he said and did was less violent. To use anger in a positive way, it is better to avoid thinking too much about the person we are angry with. It is better to think about the people who have been hurt by the person's actions. Martin Luther King Jr. often did this. He said he was not trying to beat the white man. He wanted to free black children. Thinking about those who have been hurt can lead to a different kind of anger. Research has shown that when we are angry with someone, we want to hurt them. But when we are angry for someone, we want to make things better for them. We don't want to punish, we want to help. When a voice told Serbians there was nothing to celebrate on New Year's Eve, they felt an angry energy. Popovich said, "There was an energy in the air that no rock band could ever recreate. Everybody felt that they had something important to do." The next fall, Milosevic lost the election, and the man who told the people to go home became the president of Serbia 4 years later. E.B. White once wrote that he woke in the morning unable to decide whether he wanted to improve the world or to enjoy the world. He commented in an interview with the New York Times, "This makes it difficult to plan the day." As we search for happiness, many of us choose to enjoy the world as it is. Originals take a more difficult path, trying to make the world what it could be. they may have to forget about their own happiness for a time. Becoming original is not the easiest way to find happiness, but the journey brings its own happiness.